And now we reach the most exciting bit of hacking. We've identified the IP address of our target machine. We identified what services are running on the machine, and we were able to see if there are any vulnerabilities affecting these services. The next and last step in this course is to take advantage of these weaknesses and exploit them in such a way that we can gain remote control over the target machine. And we do this using exploitation. So what is an exploit? An exploit is taking advantage of the weakness. We want to take advantage of the vulnerability that we identified. Just because we found out the vulnerability doesn't mean that we now have control over the system. If the vulnerability is there, but we cannot take advantage of it, it's of no use to us. So an exploit could be as simple as guessing the correct password, for example. If your target machine has a weak password and you're able to guess it and connect to it remotely, you have successfully exploited the machine. The vulnerability in that case was a weak password, you took advantage of it, you exploited it, and you got full control over the machine. This is what an exploit is in its simplest form. A more complex exploit could be writing a particular program specifically tailored to the target. And this comes at later, more advanced stages in your hacking career. Luckily for us, there's an amazing tool that packages thousands and thousands of exploits in one package. And the tool is named Metasploit. You can either download and install Metasploit from their website, or you can use it from one of the readily available Linux distributions that are specially configured for ethical hacking. I'm going to include a separate video on how to download and install one of the Linux distributions that come pre-packaged with Metasploit and Map and a whole bunch of other tools. It is a Linux operating system though, so if you're still not comfortable with Linux, you can download and install Metasploitable for your Windows operating system. To do this, go to the metasploit.com website and click on Free Metasploit Download. You're going to have to submit a request asking for a copy of Metasploit. That might take a few days for them to review the request and provide you with a copy. Once you have the Metasploit setup file, it's a straightforward process. Start the setup, follow the instructions, and you'll be done in no time. Keep in mind though that Metasploit has a lot of different exploits pre-built into it, and some of these exploits do not agree with firewalls and antiviruses. So if you have an antivirus setup, it might complain and pop up alerts saying that there are viruses being installed. That's not the case. These are just exploits that your antivirus might confuse for viruses. So now that you have Metasploit installed and you have all these exploits ready, let us explore how you can use this to take advantage of some of the vulnerabilities we identified in such a way that you can gain full control over the target operating system. Let's go back to our Nessus scan and open the report. In the report, you'll find a vulnerability titled VNC Server Password. What this basically says is that there's a service running on our target machine called VNC, and it has the weak password of password setup, which means that we would be able to connect to this remote server using the password. For you to be able to do that, find the Metasploit installation on your Windows machine, and under the Metasploit, you'll find a VNC viewer button. This is a VNC software that allows you to connect to a VNC server. If you're able to connect successfully to VNC server, you will have remote access to the target machine. For you to do that, fill in the IP address of the target machine, and the password we know by now that it is password. This is what Nessus was able to identify as a weakness. So we're just going to type password. And here we go. We now have graphical remote access to the Metasploitable machine. If you type who am I, this is a Linux command that returns the identity of the logged in user. You'll see that the output is root. On Linux, root is the equivalent of the super administrator on Windows. So now you have graphical access to the remote machine with full administrative control. just because one of the services on it has a weak password. Let us try a more complex exploit, something a little bit more fancy, something that looks a little bit more like hacker type stuff. Let's go back to our Nessus report and scroll down to the medium section vulnerabilities and find a vulnerability that starts with Samba 3.0.0. If we read the description of the vulnerability, it tells us that we can, using that vulnerability, exploit remote code on the machine, which means that we might be able to exploit the machine remotely. To read more about it, we can also see a link provided by Nessus. The link has a CVE number, which is a number unique to each vulnerability identified. Remember, just because there is a vulnerability, that does not mean that there is an exploit to this vulnerability. So there is a weakness, we know this for now. But can we take advantage of this weakness? Is there a way we can exploit it to our advantage so that we can take full control over the remote machine? Let's find out. There's a website dedicated to recording every single vulnerability out there. And you can find this website at exploit-db.com. Let's see if there's an exploit to the vulnerability. Click on Search. And type in the CVE number that was identified by Nessus. Type the CAPTCHA and click on Search. It seems that we are in luck. It looks like there's an exploit to the vulnerability. This is what an exploit looks like. For this particular vulnerability that affects the Samba service, the exploit is the code that you're currently looking at on this page. In the days before Metasploit, to be able to exploit a vulnerability, you would have to either find the pieces of code online or write this code yourself. If somebody has already written the code for you, there would have been a very good chance that the code wouldn't work on your target. You would have to take the code and alter it, change IP addresses, change other parts of the code for it to work. So you are forced to have a very good understanding of how exploit code works and how you can edit it in such a way that you can make it work to your particular target. Luckily for you now, as a beginner, you do not have to do that anymore. So you can see here that the author of this particular piece of code is Metasploit, which basically means that if we go back to our Metasploit software, the exploit code is there and we can edit it directly from the Metasploit interface. So we're going to search for that particular vulnerability. We type in search and the CVE number. So here we go, we found the exploit. To tell Metasploit that I want to use this exploit, we type in use and the path to the exploit. An easy way to do this is if you type the first few letters and hit the tab key, and Metasploit will complete the string for you. So type use, expl, tab, multi-tab, and so on. Notice now that the prompt of Metasploit has changed from MSF to MSF exploit user map underscore script, which basically means now we're setting up the exploit that we're going to be used to take advantage of the vulnerability. The next step we want to do is we want to configure this exploit to target our particular Metasploitable machine. To find out what kind of settings we have, we type show options. And we can see that we have two options we can change. The R host, which is the remote host, and the R port, which is the remote port. Obviously, I want to set the R host to match the IP address of my target machine. The way I do this on Metasploit is I type set space R host and the IP address of the target. I click on show options again, and now I can see that the IP address is set in the field next to the R host. To run the exploit so that I can take advantage of the vulnerability, I type run and hit enter. But unfortunately, nothing happened. The reason nothing happened apparently is because I forgot to turn off my firewall. Remember when we mentioned that Metasploit doesn't like firewalls, or firewalls don't like Metasploit? So I want to go on my Windows operating system and turn off the firewall. Once that's done, I'm gonna try and run the exploit again. And now it looks like it's working. The exploit has finished running, and it looks like I have some kind of command prompt which I can use to type commands directly onto the target machine. So the first thing I want to do is find out what kind of access do I have on my target machine. I type who am I, and the response is root. So now I know that I have root or super admin access to the target machine. I type ifconfig